Hey there, this is Dr. Mort Orman, and today I'm going to be talking to you about part 3 of this recently released book called The Code of the Extraordinary Mind by Mind Valley founder Vishen Lakhiani. And the title of this section is called Recode Yourself, Transforming Your Inner World. And it's really about one simple principle. It's really about being happy and being happy now in the present moment every day of your life, instead of deferring your happiness out into the future until some specific thing is achieved or some goal is realized. It's about two things actually, about being happy every day and making sure you set up your goals properly and your visions properly so that they're not dependent on outside forces for you to realize them and to experience satisfaction in achieving them, and to not defer your happiness until sometime in the future. And I want to share an example from my own life of how I applied these principles many years ago, and that has to do with the first time I trained to run my first marathon. And I successfully did that, and I went on to run 5 other marathons and actually created a course and taught people how to enjoy running, and had people come to me and ask me to help them in how to run their first marathon. In fact, there was one of my students that came to me because he had tried 4 times in the past to run a marathon. He'd failed each time, he'd gotten injured. He came to me, I reworked his whole training schedule, gave him some insights into how to train properly. He went on, he completed his first marathon after working with me, and he's gone on now, he's run more than 40 marathons. I mean, the guy's amazing. But this story has to do with the fact that I trained in a very unconventional way to run my first marathon and all my subsequent marathons. And I actually had a good friend that came to me a couple years after I had completed my first one, and he decided he was going to get into marathon running. And he asked me for advice on how he should train. And here's what I told him. I said, you should train in such a way that every day that you train is a source of joy and satisfaction for you, and that you're happy each and every day. So much so that if you train for 3 or 4 months, and by the end of that time, when the day for the race comes, if they cancel the race, you won't care. You will have gotten so much enjoyment, so much satisfaction, so much personal fulfillment out of just training each and every day to get to that place where you can run that marathon, that if they cancel the race, you won't give a damn, and you'll be totally fine with it. And that's how I trained for my races. I actually applied one of the principles that Vishen talks about very early on in his book. Is I completely disregarded one of the major cultural beliefs that had been passed down to me about how to exercise, because for me, running my first marathon was the equivalent, on my personal level was the equivalent of walking on the moon, the equivalent of climbing Mount Everest. It was something that I never dreamed I could possibly do. I never thought I had it in me. I never thought, and one of the main reasons was because I absolutely hated running. I mean, I couldn't stand it. It was a totally unenjoyable activity. I was miserable every time I tried to run. It was like punishment. And I made a conscious decision to really re-engineer myself, to find out how to make running fun, because I absolutely hated it. And I knew if I was going to run a marathon and train for 3 or 4 months and eventually get up to the point where I could run 5 to 7 miles a day for a couple months in a row, that I was going to have to figure out how to turn that all around. And I did. And one of the first things I did is I took one of the primary rules that had been given to me about exercise in general, and I completely said, I'm not doing that. And that rule was no pain, no gain. So I had always sort of been wired that to get the benefits of physical exercise, you had to go out and push yourself and go through the misery and the discomfort, the physical discomfort of running or exercising. And that's how I went out and ran, and no wonder I hated it. Well, when I set up this training program for myself to completely turn things around, that was the first rule that I said, I ain't doing it that way. I'm creating my own rules here. And my rule in my world, I'm going to say that my goal is going to be to enjoy every day, to enjoy every run, to have no physical discomfort or as little physical discomfort as possible. And that's how I'm going to do exercise. Okay, I'm going to create my own rule. And I was actually able to do that. I was actually able to discover a lot of ways that I was making running into a miserable activity. And like I said, I went on and created a course where I passed on some of these principles to other people. Wildly successful course. People raved about it. It was great. But the point here is I took two principles, the two main principles that Vishen talks about in this third part of the book, and I applied them. And those principles were: don't defer your happiness to sometime in the future. Don't make it about 3 months down the road, 4 months down the road on the day that you run the race. Then you're going to feel happy and satisfied when you cross the finish line. I mean, you will feel happy and satisfied when you cross the finish line, but make it about every day, enjoying every single day. And that's the goal that I set for myself. And the second principle he points out in part 3 of his book is that that's how you should set your goals and your visions. Don't set them up so they're dependent on something down the road that may or may not happen. You know, that make it about things you can control every day, that you can experience happiness every day. And that's exactly what I did. And I had a great time. And it really worked very well. And I still got to the same end goal, but it wouldn't have mattered. You know, I enjoyed every single day along the way. So that's part 3 of his book is all about how you can live every day, being happy every day, having big goals, having lofty goals, but not putting your happiness onto some future date, setting it up in a way where you set your goals in such a way that it's about progressing, it's about moving forward, it's about experiencing or getting wins each and every day as how you set up your goals. And he calls those self-fueled goals as opposed to end goals. And so I wanted to give you an example from my own personal life of how I tapped into that principle that he's talking about, 30 years ago, and got a lot of value out of it. And oh, by the way, if you're interested in what happened to my friend, he trained for his first marathon, followed my advice. The day of his first marathon, it snowed very heavily. They canceled the race, scheduled it 6 months later in the springtime. He wasn't fazed by that. He just continued to get enjoyment out of his running every day, and eventually trained up for that race, successfully ran that marathon when it actually happened. So that's just a little personal example of how I applied some of the principles that Vishen is talking about in this book. They work, and I highly recommend that you take a look at it. So I'll talk to you tomorrow where we do the 5th and final installment in this 5-part series.